Morning. Have to say I'm delighted to be here today. We were a bit worried, my colleague Emma's here with me as well, we were a bit worried we might not make it here because we were flying out of Belfast yesterday just in front of Storm Agnes coming in. But we were lucky, Emma and I sat and had a nice glass of wine down by the river yesterday afternoon and admired Newark, whilst friends from Belfast were telling us how absolutely horrendous the weather in Belfast was. So it seems like a good excuse to be here. So when I offered to speak at this conference today, I'd assumed that I was going to be launching our new standards and guidance document for the creation and care of archaeological archives in Northern Ireland. As it happens, the talk I'm about to give you is a bit different from that, and there's a number of reasons for that, and I'll come on to that in a wee bit. But I have to say, and the reasons for this will become apparent, the timing of this conference couldn't have been better for us in an awful lot of ways. So I'll give you a wee bit of background just to put some of this into context. So HED is the government body in Northern Ireland with responsibility for the historic environment. We're similar in a lot of ways to HES, CADU, Historic England. One major difference, I suppose, is that we're also the regulatory and consenting body for archaeological licensing for excavations in Northern Ireland. So it's illegal to excavate without a license from Department for Communities. So on the slide, you can see the guidance notes that accompany the license application form. That process is very similar to the south of Ireland, where you also need a license to excavate. And those licenses come with specific conditions attached to them. And that includes the need to conduct post-excavation reporting and the creation of an archive. The other piece where we differ from absolutely everybody, and this is to our shame, so I'm slightly washing our dirty linen in public here, I have to admit. I'm sure it won't go any further than this room there. We currently have no repository for archaeological archives in Northern Ireland. So the archives usually are held by the unit that's conducted the excavations. Again, a whole lot of reasons for that, and that's definitely a story for another day. But what we are doing at present is we're starting to put our own stores into order. So this is a photograph from our store in Ballymena. The AAF very kindly came and visited last year, I've lost all track of time, using our own draft standards and guidance for archives in Northern Ireland. So we're trying to do this almost as a bit of a pilot on our own material and getting our own stuff into order. And we're also trying at the same time to work up a business case in partnership with our colleagues from National Museums Northern Ireland to create an archaeological resource centre. And I think it's probably not unlike what's happening in England at the moment with that move towards a national repository. Given the speed of government that we're notorious for moving at, realistically, I'm aspiring to have the Archaeological Resource Centre in place before I retire. And I'm not telling you how long away I'm hoping that's going to be. But I think realistically, we know it's going to take us a while to get there. But it's a piece of work we know we really need to be focusing on now. We can't let this situation keep going with no repository in Northern Ireland. It doesn't align with the Valletta Convention, doesn't align with any professional standards out there. So we know we need to address it one way or another. And you'll see this talk, having that national repository at the moment, that's led to some unfortunate consequences for us. So as part of our remit as that government regulatory body and our efforts to put those things onto better footing, over the last couple of years, as Jen mentioned, with CIfA and with the Institute of Archaeologists of Ireland, to develop that suite of 4 new guidance documents for excavation, human remains, archives, and digital archiving. To be honest, those are documents we either have never had in Northern Ireland, or we do have one on excavation, but it's so far out of date now that it's just not really practical. The documents we've drafted up reference the existing standards and guidance of both CIfA and IAI, but they basically provide advice on how to meet those standards in a Northern Ireland specific context so that you can fulfill license. So for example, CIfA obviously has guidance on archives, but when it talks about appropriately packaging an archive for deposition, what type of boxes do we require? What size should those boxes be to meet the requirements in Northern Ireland? Duncan's probably horrified that everything seems to come down to box sizes even after all these years. Because a lot of the commercial units in Ireland and Northern Ireland work on both sides of the border, we've been looking at how we can align our guidance in Northern Ireland as much as possible with the national museums in the south, to make things basically as practical for people carrying out the work as we can. We've been taking advice from National Museums Northern Ireland as well, and we're basically trying to take a partnership approach as much as we can. And we're aiming to standardise things, as I say, as much as we can, just to make it easy for researchers and as accessible as we can in future. We have the advantage, I suppose, that Northern Ireland is quite a small place. We're one area, so whatever we impose or bring to the sector, we can apply it across the whole of Northern Ireland. And again, that thing of aligning with the colleagues in the south, just to make sure that it's easy for people. And we've got, because we've got excavation licensing as well, it gives us that bit of leverage and that bit of control of what the archive should look like. But again, I come back to this fact that we don't have the central repository at the moment and the problem that causes. So our approach really, we don't have that central repository at the moment, but from our perspective, really, the guidance has been out there, as Duncan was saying, the guidance on this has been out there for years from AAF and Arches. So archives really should be being prepared to that professional standard. To my mind, it doesn't really matter whose shelf it's sitting on just at the moment. It still should be prepared to those existing standards. Moving on then to why I'm giving you an entirely different talk today from the one I'd intended to be, and where we're at in Northern Ireland with regards to our archives and our finds. We'd done lots of very good work, I hope, on our guidance documents with the help of CIfA and IAI. We'd sent off the ones on excavation and human remains to the design team to get them ready for publication. We came to the archives one, and I thought, well, this one will be easy. This will be the straightforward one. Our colleagues in National Museums Ireland have just recently published their guidance. You can see on the screen there in 2022. We know Scotland has good guidance. We're aware of other ones that have been fairly recently published. And this looked like ideal timing for us. Basically, all we have to do is cherry pick the best of everybody else's hard work. So it's going to be great. And it was great. And then we came to the section on marking of archaeological finds. And we had a beautifully written piece of advice on how to mark the finds. And then I asked questions, and I suspect our team have been regretting that I asked those questions ever since. So these are Rhonda's awkward questions. First question, what do we mark onto the finds? Because we've never published guidance before in Northern Ireland. So people have been doing their own thing over the years. And we thought this would be a good opportunity to bring in standardization. So by the time we get to having our Archaeological Resource Centre, everything that's been done in that intervening period is all marked consistently. And yes, I know the slide shows labelling and not marking, and that might be quite telling. We'll come on to that. Second question was a bit more difficult. So what materials do we recommend marking and what don't we? So how do we go about answering these questions? Fortunately, we've the cross-sectoral working groups at the moment, which are participating in Archaeology 2030. That's a strategic approach for Northern Ireland, and it's probably fairly like Scotland's archaeology strategy. In fact, it will look terribly familiar to anybody who knows Scotland's archaeology strategy. There's a reason for that. And 21st century challenges for archaeology in England. Those working groups, I have to say, have been absolutely invaluable. They consist of a really wide range of people, commercial units, researchers in the university, community groups, all sorts. And they seemed to me like the perfect group to ask their opinions and their experience and finds. And it was brilliant. I have to say, it really was brilliant. We got really thoughtful, detailed, lengthy responses. People took time and really took the effort to give us their thoughts on this. And it was really helpful for us to understand the current practice in Northern Ireland, particularly in the commercial sector. So on the first question, the answer has been fairly simple. Almost everybody wanted to use the excavation license number and the find number. Some wanted to include the context number, some didn't, but this is great. We've got rough consensus, which is probably approaching a miracle in archaeology. And it's also very similar to the approach our colleagues in the museums in the South take. So again, that piece about trying to align things as much as possible trying to make things as easy as possible for everybody. And you can see here what that sort of looks like. But once we get into the detail, variations emerged as to how exactly people were allocating fines numbers. And what started off seeming quite straightforward has turned out to be a wee bit more complex. But we think we're roughly in the right place in this one. We're going to work through the detail on it a wee bit more, but we've a good idea of where we're at. So on the question of what do we recommend marking and don't we? This one was really going to be easy because everybody else has already got this information in their guidance and we can just lift that, can't we? Not quite is what I found. You think I'd learn by now that what I think is going to be straightforward is never quite as easy as I thought. From what I can see, no two places necessarily recommend the same thing. So I think Suffolk recommends marking glass, Leicestershire doesn't, Northamptonshire doesn't recommend marking clay pipe, but Suffolk does. So all my great plans of creating this lovely little table to put into my document kind of went out the window a bit. So we turned back to our colleagues in the south of Ireland again because we thought, well, this will be good. They've published guidance in 2022. We can just lift their stuff. And again, that'll help with this alignment piece. And Ireland takes a very strong position on basically everything is marked. There's some practical exceptions to that, but they're fairly strong on that. And they provide that sort of a set of considerations to be taken into account, a practical approach to it. But I thought, as a bit of background approach, I thought I'd better go back to those Archaeology 2030 working groups and talk to them again about how the various units out there, research units and commercial units, approach this. And I got a bit of a nasty surprise, I have to admit. The vast majority of the units stopped marking fines some years ago. Decades is pretty much what I was told for most of them. The reasons ranged from time, cost, lack of resources, uncertainty. It might be doing more harm than good, really. And nobody wants to look at these fines anyway, so why bother? And I suspect probably the biggest reason, nobody dared mention this directly to me, I suspect, but it wasn't a requirement, a specific requirement of the excavation license. HED hadn't published any standards or requirements on this, so why bother, really? It's a good way to keep costs down. And the fact, again, that we don't have this central repository in Northern Ireland that's taking in the fines is clearly a key factor in this. There's clearly a big element of carrot that we're missing here because nobody's going to deposit their fines with us. We're not checking them. So we can see the results of that. So what we've started to try to do is to draft up a table setting out how we think items should be marked, how to label them, how to package them, how to store them. You can see a bit of an extract of the table here, based again, as I say, on guidance from picking everybody else's brains that we can. But really, I think what's come out of our discussions is that much wider range of questions. And that's really why I'm here today, because I'm hoping to pick as many people's brains as possible on this. Why are we marking fines? Is it just because we always have? Do we still think it's the best thing we should be doing? Is the way we're doing it the right way we should be doing it? Does the benefit outweigh the time and the cost? Can we demonstrate the value from it? How do we make sure we're at the right level of granularity? Does everything need to be marked? If not, how do we define in our guidance what should be marked? Is the way we're doing it still the best? Is the research out there on new techniques? Does marking in the way we currently do restrict future research possibilities in future? And I'm not a conservator, so I don't feel I'm in any kind of position to answer an awful lot of those. But even I can see that scientific analysis is moving on at such a rate at the minute with new techniques. We do come back to that question about, are we doing more harm than good in any way? So this seemed very timely to be asking these kind of questions with this conference taking place today. So to finish off then, where are we at with our standards and guidance for the creation and care of archaeological archives in Northern Ireland? I'll be honest, we're a bit confused at this point, but I think we're also feeling that this is a really good time to be doing it because there's this discussion going on in the sector. And this just seemed like a brilliant opportunity for us to be bringing this here today and to talk to people about it. So we have more questions than we have answers at this point, but I would be delighted to talk to anybody about this. I think Emma and I, to get our flights back to Belfast this afternoon, probably have to leave maybe 3 o'clock-ish. But nab me over lunchtime or tea break or anything else. If anybody's any advice, I would accept it very gratefully indeed. Thank you.